Hello everyone, today I will tell you about the film Dallas Buyers Club. Enjoy watching! The film begins with the main character, Texas electrician Ron Woodroof, watching a rodeo from under the stands. Ron, in addition to his main job, is a cowboy, and also does not avoid gambling, betting, drug use, and orgies. In fact, this is exactly what she does in the first scene, sniffing powder and having fun with two women. Later, he collects bets on how long one of his friends will last on a bull. The plan fails, and his friend almost immediately falls to the ground. Ron runs away from the bettors, but they catch up with him outside. To get rid of the chase, he hits a policeman who is actually his childhood friend, Tucker. Pretending to arrest the businessman, the cop gives him a ride home. Getting out of the car, Ron almost falls, but pretends that everything is fine. However, as soon as he enters the house, he falls to the floor and passes out, lying there until nightfall. The next day at work, Ron carelessly reaches into the electrical panel with a screwdriver. He is electrocuted, after which he comes to in the hospital. Two doctors, Dr. Seward and Dr. Sax, report bad news. In addition to traces of drugs, they found HIV infection, which causes AIDS, in his blood. The doctors want to know if he has used intravenous drugs or had homosexual relations. The simple Texan guy is deeply offended by the doubt in his masculinity. He is rude to the medical staff, who give him 30 days maximum. In such a state, they do not live longer. Ron proudly leaves the hospital, stating that the doctors made a mistake. But at a party with drugs and elements of an orgy, he abstains from promiscuous sexual relations. His thoughts revolve around the diagnosis. This is noticed by his friend, to whom Ron tells that he was mistakenly diagnosed with AIDS. A few minutes later, the hero glances at the calendar and sees the number 30. That's exactly how much time he has left. The next day, he goes to the library to learn more about the disease, which was not yet widespread in 1985. At the same time, the hospital is negotiating clinical trials of a new drug for AIDS therapy, AZT. Having read scientific articles and realizing the scale of the tragedy, Ron returns to the hospital, demanding an appointment with Dr. Seward. But he is not there. But he can be seen by Dr. Sax, a woman which at first causes discontent in the rude and straightforward man. Nevertheless, he goes to the appointment and asks to enroll him in the AZT research program. But the doctors can do nothing. The appointment is distributed randomly, and some patients will receive a placebo instead of the active substance. Realizing that he has little chance of surviving without medication until the end of the research, Ron asks to get the pills in a roundabout way. But the doctor can only offer a support group. Upset, Ron goes to his favorite bar, where his friends have already gathered. But they suspect that he was infected due to same-sex relations, which is not very welcome in the conservative South. Things almost come to blows, after which the hero leaves. He goes to meet the support group, where he collects informational brochures about AIDS and almost beats up a gay man who spoke to him. Then the man seeks solace in his usual things: a strip bar, alcohol and prayer, and combining all at once. Here he notices a nurse from the hospital. Ron manages to persuade him to steal some of the experimental AZT for sale. For some time, he uses the stolen pills, washing them down with alcohol and snorting powder. At some point, the supplies stop and the accounting becomes stricter. Having taken the money for the last batch from the exhausted Ron, the nurse gives him the address of a hospital in Mexico, where they might be able to help. An angry Ron tries to hit the orderly, but misses and falls unconscious. He comes to again in the hospital after a blood transfusion. The doctors are interested in how he got the drug, but Ron does not confess. Here he meets a transvestite, Rayon, made up like some kind of clown prince of the criminal world, and he passes as a test subject in the tests. True, he sells some of the pills to rich acquaintances, at least some chance to prolong his existence. Ron asks if he can sell him some, but Rayon refuses. He doesn't have enough pills anyway. Realizing that lying in bed waiting to die is boring, the hero discharges himself from the hospital and goes home. Former friends have already left offensive messages on the walls, and the landlord has changed the lock. Using a shotgun, Ron enters his former home, where he collects the remaining cash from all the stashes. Then he goes to Mexico, stopping to cry. Arriving at the address, he finds Dr. Vass, a disbarred owner of an underground hospital. Instead of AZT, he uses alternative drugs that are less toxic to the body. After studying Ron's tests, the doctor forbids the use of drugs, prescribing vitamins and lesser-known drugs instead. After a 3-month course, the hero feels better. Then Ron realizes that he can make good money on this. He buys as many medications from Vass as he can fit in the trunk of his car and returns to Texas. Having worked out a cunning plan before the border, Ron pretends to be a priest with cancer. He is detained, but he manages to convince the border guards that all the drugs in the car are not for sale, but for personal use. He is simply so sick that he needs a lot of medication. The trick works. They let him through. In his homeland, Ron goes to places where homosexuals gather, offering them more effective drugs to fight AIDS. He is noticed by his former roommate Ryan. He wants to buy a large batch, but suddenly changes his mind and gets out of the car, considering that the homophobe Ron is not worthy of his money. Ron catches up with Ryan and offers a share in the business if he helps with the clientele. The two of them begin traveling around gay clubs, selling counterfeit pharmaceuticals. Business takes off, and Ron rents several motel rooms for an office and overnight stay. To avoid problems with the law, he stops selling drugs and organizes the Dallas Buyers Club, a charity organization where medications are given away for free, but only to club members. And membership in turn costs $400 per month. During this time, Dr. Sax at the hospital has learned experimentally what Ron already knew from Dr. Vass. The experimental AZT has a toxic effect on patients. The medic is looking for Ryan, who has not been in for an appointment for a long time. He tells how he helps people with the help of uncertified drugs. But Dr. Sax is strictly against this approach. Ron and Ryan's friendship grows stronger, despite past disagreements. Ron even stands up for a transvestite when they meet a former friend in a store. But he does not approve of addiction to cocaine, reprimanding a business colleague for his irresponsible attitude. In order to establish drug supplies, Ron flies to Japan, to a chemical plant. Contrary to verbal agreements over the phone, they refuse to sell him a large batch. Allegedly, only Japanese patients have the right to Japanese drugs. The American has to resort to trickery, to hire a special Japanese businessman to make an order for him. After a long flight back to Dallas, Ron feels ill at the airport. He urgently injects himself with an imported drug in the toilet, from which his heart almost fails. He is again taken to the hospital to Dr. Seward. The situation is aggravated by the interest of the police in the transportation of drugs. Since their sale is prohibited and the use of the first dose almost killed Ron, the entire batch from his luggage is confiscated. It is not possible to return the goods back legally. Therefore, the businessman has to go to Europe and Asia. Upon returning, Ron tells Dr. Sax about how he chooses drugs for himself and his brothers in misfortune. Everything is better than toxic, but approved by the AZT Commission. Imported drugs help patients prolong their lives much longer than doctors expected. Later, he invites a woman to a restaurant, where he talks about his difficult path and fight against the virus. However, the popularity of the club leads to the fact that Dr. Seward has no patients left. He has to pull some strings, after which Ron's office is checked by the tax office, confiscating all available supplies in the process. This happens against the backdrop of protests across the country demanding that the approval process for new drugs to treat HIV infection be accelerated. But the result is literally the opposite. On March 11, 1987, the FDA amended the law, according to which sick people can only take drugs prescribed by doctors. These changes make Ron's event illegal. Now he cannot bring drugs supposedly for personal use without a prescription. Before starting to solve the problem, the hero gives some of his supplies to the policeman Tucker. They will help his father, who suffers from Alzheimer's. Later, the club members offer Ron to move into an empty house, where they can set up an office for free. In the current circumstances, financially constrained, Ron is glad of such help. Immediately after the move, Ron and Ryan go to meet the support group, agitating them to join their club and not to trust pharmacists advertising AZT. Continues to use drugs, goes to his father, who rejected his son because of his non-traditional orientation. The transvestite asks his father for money to financially support a friend with whom they were brought together by one disease. Having received money from his partner, Ron asks Dr. Sax to write a prescription for him, but she refuses. This does not stop the cunning electrician. He still flies to Mexico to Dr. Vass, where he buys new medications and receives an article on the toxicity and danger of AZT. During the return flight, he fills out prescription cards in the airplane cabin. Ron stole them from Dr. Sax during his last visit. At the airport, he is checked, and by a strange coincidence, the names of all the patients exactly repeat the composition of the Dallas Cowboys team. Returning to the office, he learns that Ryan has become ill during his absence. He was taken to the hospital, where he was injected with AZT. He eventually died from it. Ron searches for Dr. Seward, almost beating him up in front of his patients, but security intervenes. In the evening, he gets drunk, thus remembering his friend. After this incident, Ron launches an agitation campaign against the FDA, lobbying for AZT, and at the same time sues the commission for prohibiting the use of any drugs for terminally ill people. In all the organizational matters, Ron forgets to replenish his own supply of drugs. One morning, it turns out that they have run out. He becomes ill. He doesn't make it to the border when he is overcome by an attack. The police notice the unconscious man wandering in the middle of the road, but Tucker recognizes his friend and takes him with him. At home, he injects him with drugs from the box that was intended for his father. 6 months later, Ron's court hearing against the FDA takes place in San Francisco. Recognizing the right of patients to fight for life by all means, and the illogicality of the terms of the Oversight Committee, the judge, however, cannot bypass the existing law. The lawsuit is dismissed. Ron returns to Dallas, where the people he helps to survive are waiting for him. However, he was personally allowed to purchase peptide tea for personal use. The drug allowed him to live for some time, even performing in the rodeo. The film ends with an attempt to stay on a jumping bull. The end credits inform viewers that the real Ron Woodroof died of AIDS on September 12, 1992, without 557 days after his diagnosis. Even though doctors gave him a maximum of 30 days to live, instead of 1 month, he battled the disease for 7 more years, helping many others like him along the way.